Okay, Mike, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
We now have a admin report from Major Scott Stevens of the Police Department and Leroy Eady, Director of Parks, on Occupy Spokane. Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening, Council President, City Council, Leroy Eady, City of Spokane Parks and Recreation Director, and with me tonight, Acting Assistant Police Chief Major Scott Stevens is here, and I'm going to go through the presentation here pretty quickly, but any point you want to jump up, just jump up and stop me. The Mayor asked me to give you a quick update on the status of Occupy Spokane. I'm probably not the most logical representative to give this presentation to you tonight, as the Mayor has designated Jonathan Mallahan to be the lead contact, and he's been the one that's been facilitating the discussion primarily back and forth between the City of Spokane and Occupy Spokane. But I've been sitting on that team. But Jonathan's on vacation this week, and as the Occupy movement has moved into Franklin Park, I'm much more intimately involved in this conversation. So I'm just going to give you a quick update on where we're at today. So Occupy Spokane has been here for a couple months, primarily at Monroe and Riverside. That's the location that they have been exercising their First Amendment rights during most of that time. We have to stress that we've had a great working relationship with the Occupy Spokane group. The representatives that we've been meeting with are very reasonable people, very willing to work through solutions, very willing to have conversations, and we appreciate that tremendously as the City of Spokane. And this is a different approach than we've seen in other communities, both I think on the side of City of Spokane and on the side of Occupy Spokane, where there's just been a lot of collaboration all around. At all times, we've completely supported the citizens' right to free speech. We are in no way trying to take that away from this group. And that's a lot of our discussions is finding ways to make sure that that can happen within the rules and regulations of the City of Spokane. So what has occurred so far? The Occupy Spokane movement began with an encampment along the medians on Riverside, just west of Monroe Street. In late September, SPD asked the people in those locations to remove the tents and kitchen and other materials, and this happened very peacefully.
Leroy, could you go back 2 slides real quick, though? Could you read that last sentence, please?
So, of course, in anyone's efforts to exercise their rights of free speech, they can't obstruct others' use of the sidewalk, and they have to obey all traffic laws.
Okay, thanks.
So free speech activities continued at that location after the tents were removed and the kitchen was removed. The kitchen was relocated at the south end of the Monroe Street Bridge, southeast end of the Monroe Street Bridge, and that's library property. The group was granted a permit on that location. It's public property, again, not park property, and they were given a 14-day permit. That was not given by me. That was given by Mr. Dave Mandyke authored that permit. That permit was never extended, and the kitchen was closed before that transient shelter permit, that initial 14-day permit, expired. And then, of course, throughout this time, Occupy Spokane has had multiple marches throughout the city and at least one rally. Those have all been managed very well. They've complied with staying on the sidewalk and not blocking traffic and obeying traffic signals, and that's just been an excellent coordination on their part. Last week, we learned that the group had intended to start a second protest site at Franklin Park. And they wanted to have a larger presence. They want to provide food and tents. So we met with the group quite quickly so that we could make sure that the rumor that we were hearing was actually true and start to work through solutions. So we met with them on Wednesday afternoon before their desire to move into the park. And then we had meetings last Thursday and Friday as well. And I haven't said much about the team. Again, Jonathan Mallahan's been kind of our lead contact, but I've been on the team. Of course, Major Scott's been on the team. Howard Delaney's been on the team. Marlene Feist, representatives from the fire department. Dave Mandyke, when he's needed in that discussion as well. And then other staff as they've moved in and out of the conversation. So they've been there as well. So let's talk a little bit more about Franklin Park. There are a couple of challenges with Franklin Park. I should say, before we move too much further, that so everybody understands, I have issued a permit, a transient shelter permit for Franklin Park. The ordinance allows for a 3-day permit. We've issued that, and it allows for another 3-day permit within a 12-month period. We've issued that as well. And so the group has a permit to be on that location in Franklin Park until midnight Thursday evening. So just a couple of the challenges with locating in Franklin Park. Without the permit, we have a park curfew in our neighborhood parks, and during this time, it's 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. In the summer, it goes a little bit later, but 10 p.m. this time of year. Again, the transient shelter ordinance allowed for a 3-day permit rather than a 14-day permit on public land. And the rationale behind this, when those ordinances were drafted, my understanding is the parks has a couple activities, one in particular when we have powwow in the park, that we needed something to be able to accommodate some overnight stay, but in the interest of protecting park assets, it wasn't was determined that we didn't want to have anything longer than a 3-day permit with the potential for a 3-day extension. One of the challenges of Franklin Park as well is there's very little right-of-way around the edges of the park because, right-of-way, for example, the site downtown where Occupy has been for the most part is within public right-of-way, and you can be in right-of-way as long as you're not blocking sidewalks or impeding traffic. You can be in that right-of-way, but there's very little right-of-way around the edges of the park. Just a little bit to the south on Queen, but along Division, there's almost no right-of-way. There's no sidewalk. The sidewalk goes through the park, and the sidewalk is actually interior to the park. It's inside the park. And then we do have an elementary school on site and adjacent neighbors. We've received quite a few comments so far. I would say that for the most part, the comments have not been there's not a tremendous amount of concern out there. And I would say the group's done a great job with complying with the permit. I've been up on the site multiple times. I was up there again this weekend, and they're doing a great job of complying with the permit. But we have heard some concerns. I'll just be honest with you. I think some of the phone calls I'm receiving are clearly political in nature and don't appear to be directly associated with what we're seeing on the ground. Again, we've had a really good working relationship here. So they got the shelter permit in time for Thursday, and again, we've granted that second 3-day permit. At this point, that permit expires at midnight on Thursday, and we have shared this with the group as well when we've met with Occupy Spokane, that SPD officers will once again ask them to move on Friday morning their tents and camping-related belongings. So what are the options for the group? Well, they can continue to protest in Franklin Park up until the curfew time. So any time between 5 a.m. and 10 p.m., they can be in the park and they can be protesting. They can move to the sidewalk or to the right-of-way or other public property when the park is closed. But they're going to have to take the tents down. They have the option of contacting the park board president, neighborhood council, or other legislative representatives, yourselves being one of those, the most obvious, to look at amendments to the shelter ordinance. I will tell you, I've asked the park board president if he was interested in holding a special park board meeting today to consider amendments to the ordinance. He was not interested in holding a special park board meeting, and I was honest with him. My advice to him would be not to amend the ordinance as it's written today. An obvious option is that they can pursue a location on private property, obviously with the permission of the property owner. Just a quick update for you. Can I answer any questions?
Nancy?
Thank you, Leroy. This was perfect timing since I've received 4 contacts of neighbors in the area there, and I've only had time to get back to 2 of them. And I do know that the media is covering what's happening up there. You answered my questions about the park hours and the amount of extensions, so I can go back and tell these people that as of Thursday night that there won't be any other extensions as far as actually having tents up, correct?
Absolutely. I don't have the ability within the ordinance. The ordinance says person or entity can make application for a permit and for a 3-day permit and can get an extended 3-day permit. And so I can't take another application. I could take an application. I'll have to deny the application if it comes from this same entity. I should note that the ordinance does allow for an appeal. The appeal would be to the Parks Board.
And that's the other thing. I had somebody pass me on an email from your administrative secretary who had told her that to voice their concerns was to write a letter to the city council and to come to the city council in this meeting, to the meeting tonight. But I just wanted to verify is that this was not within our jurisdiction. It's actually the park board's jurisdiction because it's on park property. Is that not the case?
It's always that great question. Here we are, and I see the council president smiling at me from ear to ear. The park board by city charter.
That's not what I was smiling about.
Oh, okay. The park board by city charter has power to adopt all park rules, and so that's the power they have by the city charter. But the park board does not have the power to adopt by ordinance. Only you have that power as a city council. So my recommended procedure would always be that if you're going to consider ordinance changes that affect park rules, and this one would affect activity in a park, that would go through the park board first with a recommendation to city council. And that's why I asked the question of the park board president right away to see if he was interested in holding a special park board meeting. That being said, you still have the power as a city council to amend that ordinance. Again, I wouldn't recommend it without the advice of the park board, and of course you would want to consult your legal counsel. But I don't believe, I still believe you have the power to change the ordinance, but I think you should have that recommendation from the park board.
Well, I agree. We have the power to change the ordinance. Not that I'm personally interested in changing the ordinance, but this is people who are having concerns, who are being sent from your department, telling us to come talk to us. And I'm saying, no, you need to go back and talk to the park board at this point. Is that not the case?
That is the case, and we'll correct that.
Okay, because when I that's why I wanted to clarify tonight on that. But I appreciate more than anything the good working relationship that's been established with our Occupy Spokane group. But I also was sent an article from somebody about talking about tent cities, being free speech or not, and I thought it was interesting when I read in here that under the First Amendment rights, it said speech could still be subject to time, place, and manner restrictions. And so I think that's what you're telling us here is that they can still come back during the when the park's open, as long as they're within the park, and afterwards on sidewalks. My only concern, I guess, in Franklin Park is the minute the snow melts a little bit more, there might be people again out walking that pathway in the park, and so since there's no other sidewalk per se, that I'm assuming that's considered the public right-of-way. Is that pathway considered the right-of-way? No, it's
good question. That sidewalk that runs along Division, or should I say north-south, on the east end of Franklin Park is within the park. That is not right-of-way. There's actually not a sidewalk that runs along Division that is in the right-of-way. As Division's grown, it's just gobbled up all of its right-of-way. There's a sidewalk, within close proximity. The nearest sidewalk that's in the public right-of-way is on Queen, right there at Queen and Division. Yes. That sidewalk is actually in the public right-of-way.
Okay, but in the park itself, that pathway is something that the occupiers can't just take over. That was what concerned a couple of the neighbors.
Absolutely. They could be on that sidewalk during non-curfew hours, but not during curfew hours, not after 10 p.m.
Okay, and then just a heads up that clear on the other side of the park, on the west end, I know that at least somebody came to one of that residents knocking at the door looking for, I guess, support for their movement, and that created some amount of concern of wondering how many homes are actually being contacted in the area. And they said, you don't really want that, but we'll see how it goes from there. I think that's it for me right now. Okay. Thank you.
Mr.
Welcome. The city adopted a set of camping ordinance a couple of years ago after lengthy debates, and it had to do with a few circumstances that occurred here in the city. And the park board, when they reviewed this, they pretty much followed that, but they did restrict the timeline, as you said, a little tighter to 3 days and 3 days. And I think the city's camping ordinance is, 15?
It's 14 and 14.
14 and 14, okay. And so that might be the only real difference, but the Parks Board didn't see a reason why we would want it for longer. And you mentioned the only exception they could come up with at that time. So this would have to be amended, and I think you're absolutely right. The Parks Board would have to review it at the request of the city if they wanted us to, and then we would make a recommendation to the city, and then upon what they do, adjust it appropriately. but it is something we never looked at having this on our city park property. So, you know, it doesn't mean it can't occur. It just means it's not going to be evolved at probably in less than a month or more. I can see this taking at least that long to 2 months probably to get through legislatively, both the park board and the city. So don't want anybody believing we can change all the rules overnight, because I don't think it's possible.
John? Well, I just want to commend both the participants in Occupy Spokane and our city officials and our police force for the cooperation that they've exhibited in this situation. And it's markedly in contrast to what we've seen in some other cities around the country, and I just think that's because Spokane does a better job at these type of things all around. So kudos all around. I noticed Jonathan Malhan is actually in the audience tonight, and I was just wanted to put him on the spot for a second and see if you, since you've been participating in these talks, if you had anything to add to what Leroy's told us tonight about the discussions that have been ongoing.
This is how I like to spend my vacations. The only thing I would really add is that I know there had been a couple emails.
Wait a minute. You get vacations?
Oh, right. And I come to city council.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's my kind of public servant. Appreciate that.
The only thing I would add is that there have been a couple emails coming around today about some of the signs left at the triangle. I've spoken with our city liaison folks from Occupy Spokane, and we're going to try to work on getting those. Getting that taken care of, either having the space occupied or not having the signs left on site without someone to care for them. So with that, I just think more thanks should be shown to the Occupy Spokane City Liaison team. They've been a really excellent group of people to work with, and I'd say they've been very respectful of our city's laws, and I think it's really speaks to their dedication to safely exercising their free speech rights as to why we haven't had those calls for service from SPD or fire or other city agencies. So that's been a real pleasure.
Well, the fact is that we benefit now from the fact that we address both tent cities and camping, and actually have ordinances to base our decisions on as opposed to ad hoc decisions. The other thing is I want to acknowledge both for our police department and Occupy Spokane that there have been an exchange of complimentary emails for each other. I would encourage all parties to show restraint in the future. I am so ancient. I remember Chicago in the late 60s of the public demonstrations that didn't go very well for either side. We certainly wouldn't want to see that here. Just keep in mind what... Okay, you're out of here. I heard what you said. You're done. We don't use profanity in here, sir, so thank you very much. Well, that's the way it goes, doesn't it? Keep in mind the words of Martin Luther King about nonviolence. So thank you for the report. We now move to Council Committee report to cook and serve meals. With that, we now move to open forum, where citizens are allowed 3 minutes to speak on a topic of interest to the city without attacking any particular person. We have several folks signed up here on Occupy Spokane. Again, you are all welcome to have your 3 minutes, but maybe by the fifth time, if somebody's already said what you want to say, you might consider other people's time. Mr. McGrath, I'm highly shocked that you're not on here. I expect that's an oversight, or do you really intend not to speak at open forum?
I have no intention of speaking at open forum. You have a large number of people here who have signed up for open forum, and they, I believe, need to have their rights recognized.
Thank you, Mr. McGrath. First off, we have Elliot Fabric.
And I'm going to, Joe, I'm going to let Jody go ahead of me. She's got a young one with her, and I'll just take her place. We'll just switch places.
Okay, Jody Ash. Good evening. You have 3 minutes.
Okay. First of all, I wanted to start off the letter that we took to the neighborhood where we are. We were just as a letter to intended to communicate what we were doing and that we were there. And if they had questions or concern, I left a phone number that they could call me. So that's what that letter was. So I just wanted to let you guys know that Occupy Fort Myers A judge, John Steele, granted a preliminary injunction allowing them to occupy with tents as a part of their free speech.
Who is this, ma'am?
Judge Steele
Where?
in Fort Myers.
Okay, thank you.
And let's see. The conduct of tenting and sleeping in the park is symbolic conduct which is protected by the First Amendment. That's what he says. In Irvine, California, their city council had a 5.5-hour marathon where they, says the council members each spoke in turn to the civility, articulateness, and peaceful process represented by the Irvine occupation at contrast with several other occupational villages in California, which were at that very moment being tear-gassed. The general sentiment of the officials being, this is quite clearly the model, and the occupation most in tune with city needs. So, one councilman stated clearly, I disagree with most of what you're saying, but you've clearly shown that this is an issue of free speech. So if you need to sleep on our lawn, by all means, sleep on our lawn. Also, Occupy Cleveland. Another judge issued an injunction. A federal judge by the name of, hey, I had it, Tom Johnson. Who also saw that as a First Amendment right for free speech. And another one was actually in Canada, in Victoria, Canada. And those are just the couple of ones that I have come across. I've been busy actually supporting the Occupy movement. I've slept down there for 3 nights. I live in a big, beautiful house. I have a king-size bed, a big, nice, big jetted tub, but my heart told me it was the right thing to do, to be down there with those people supporting our First Amendment rights. I'm an empath, and I feel things, and I know there's so much wrong in this world. People should not be hungry. People should not be homeless. We've got to change this, and it takes all of us. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Fabric, you have 3 minutes.
Mr. President, Council, first I just really want to thank everybody on City Council and everybody in City Government for being as collaborative and letting this Occupy movement work forward as peacefully as it has. And it is absolutely first and foremost on the part of Occupy that it is going to be peaceful. But, you know, I think there's been some problems that have been happening that are beyond the control of City Council, just like you guys are facing the budget cutbacks from the state, and there's not a lot you can do about that. You're caught in that situation. And our state is caught in the same situation with the federal government where there's been a lot of cutbacks and there's nothing the state can do about it. And we've got Congress that's deadlocked. But meanwhile, with all this happening, we've got 25 million unemployed people in this country. We've got 50 million people without health insurance. 1 in 5 American children are in households where there isn't sufficient food, shelter, or clothing. Something has to change. That's what this is about. And the fact that people have tents out there or are sleeping out there, that really has to do with directly, you know, what's happening here is people are losing their jobs, then they're losing their medical insurance, they're losing their houses, they've got no place to go. So then when you see a tent out there, that really represents, and often that really is somebody who has lost their house right here in Spokane, but they really represent what's happening here nationally. And we all know that we must make a change. There has to be a way to make a change. And this is the way the people in over 1,000 cities, not only in this nation but worldwide, are coming together to say, hey people, something's broken. You gotta fix this. It isn't right. And the other thing I just wanted to note is that this is sort of an amorphous movement. I think this is absolutely the beginning of a movement. So there are different groups involved. We have our clergy groups involved. We've got unions involved. We've got jobless people who just don't have jobs involved. People who are in foreclosure problems involved. But there's a number of different groups represented by a number of different people who've come together in this Occupy thing. And so right now, I just wanted to point out that the permit has been taken out by the chaplaincy group. But there are other groups who have similar goals or maybe slightly different goals, and they may be coming forward to apply for other permits. But again, I just really want to thank you, and in particular, I want to thank those councilmen here who have been active in supporting this Occupy movement. Some of you have actually come out and marched with us or come to our events. And I want to thank Mayor Werner, who's not here, because she was out and very actively supporting the Occupy movement early on. Anyways, thank you very much.
Thank you. May I just posit that we are here getting your message, that you convey the same message to our state legislatures, Republican and Democrat, senators and representatives, and our U.S. Congresswoman, Kathy McMorris Rogers, that you let all of them know that a lot of the problems we have now are the result of state and federal policy. Having said that, Mr. Bocook, you have 3 minutes. Your topic again is First Issues Amendment, which I'm glad to say you've told us about maybe, 8 straight times, but go ahead.
This is not about, this is about Bank of America, and I've talked to Mike Piccolo about it, but I wanted to bring it out in the open. It relates to Occupy, but it just relates to First Amendment expression and protest. Example is that around the sidewalk. If I write down on the sidewalk is public forum. That's about as First Amendment as you can get. That's in case laws, that's in our history. And when I got a security guy coming out there screaming at me and telling me that this is private property and I'm trespassing and I am committing a gross misdemeanor and I have no right to be there, I want it out in the open that the sidewalks around Bank of America, in my eyes, is public forum. That's what it is. They might say they own it, and it's the same thing at the STA Plaza. Who was sued before over freedom of religion? And I just want this out in the open. I don't know how many people are watching this TV. I hope a lot are, and I hope somebody calls Bank of America downtown Spokane and talks to whoever the security people are there, because here's what they're saying. They're going to get the police involved. Okay, go ahead and get the police involved. What are the police going to do? They're going to come over there and arrest me for exercising my First Amendment right? It's not a good idea. I just think that the police department themselves, because they take the oath to defend our Constitution, they should be going to the security people and they should say, leave the protesters alone as long as they're not blocking your doorways and blocking your traffic. That's all I got to say.
Thank you. We have Bethany Heath, followed by Deborah Condlin and Stoddard Hodson.
Good evening. I've been with this movement for, since I think probably the beginning of October. And I have met so many people in this movement. When I started organizing events about a year ago, and I met all kinds of different people, and we all had the same ideas, and a lot of times we had the same politics. But within this movement, you have so many people that are of different politics. You don't have one party. It's like if you, like
Mr. Bocook, I don't want to hear that phone again. I don't want to hear it again. Go ahead, ma'am.
So it's really an issues movement. It's probably one of the most purest issues movement I've ever been involved in. And it started out over the actions of Wall Street, and that's where the 99% came from. Was the whole idea that only the 1% of the population is benefiting from the work of the other.
That's okay. Go ahead.
That's all right. Of the people with less income. And since I've been with this movement, I've met firefighters, nurses, educators. We're not being portrayed very well in the media. And a lot of people are scared of the violence that they've been seeing all across the country. But the protests have really been nonviolent, and I think a lot of what makes people nervous is the violence that's been directed at the protesters. And that really hasn't happened here. So people in the neighborhood with concerns, I'm not really sure that, those are valid concerns. I mean, I understand their fears, but I think that the protesters have more to fear than the neighbors do.
Okay.
So I just wanted to speak out about this movement. I met this little girl the other day. This little gal was really well-spoken. She had really nice clothes, and she was talking to me about her job. She works full-time, and she was 20 years old, is my daughter's age. And she said, and I said, so how are you getting home after this? Are you taking the bus? She goes, I don't have a home. I don't have a home.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Deborah Conlon.
Deborah Conklin.
You got to
Thank you,
forgive
President
me.
Shogun.
I deliberately don't try to mispronounce your name, but I have a hard time.
Don't take it personal.
Deborah,
I
and
don't.
then started Hodgson, and then Glenn Anderson. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for hearing us tonight. I'm here tonight as one of the Spokane protest chaplains. And in that role, we have chosen from almost the very beginning to walk with the Occupy Spokane movement in the model of the protest chaplains in Boston and New York. And we've been supportive with mediation, facilitation, offering chaplaincy, offering a presence. And one of the challenges for us is in order to offer that presence, we want to be part of the structures that we have as part of our message, because in order for us to offer that presence, we need a space to do that. And it is my expectation that even though the city employees that we have been negotiating with, and I've been on the liaison team, have done a wonderful job of working with us to keep things calm and to have Spokane be one of those places that people can point to and say, you can have protests and you can get your message out and you don't have to have the violence. But I also know that we are coming to a stalemate pretty quickly, because most of the Occupy folks are pretty clear that even under existing ordinances, there are ways for this to go forward. And I would invite you to urge your city staff to think, for example, about the fact that there are different groups who have messages that we want to get out that all need to do it in this way. And so when Leroy Eady, who has been very gracious and very helpful, says there's only one group doing this, and so you only get one set of permits, I would point out that when things happen in some of our parks, the same people go to the same events, even though there are different names on the permit. So I think it might be a little short-sighted for Mr. Eady to say, well, you know, if the Spokane chaplains come, and if Occupy Spokane comes, and if perhaps one of the unions come, because it's for a similar purpose, it's the same group. And he might want to rethink that point. But I also want to speak to the fact that at some point we are going to need to sort out how we as a city make sure that people can be effective in their message, because it's not just a message to Washington or Olympia, it's also a message to Spokane citizens about the need to speak up and to talk about the things that are happening in this country that are simply wrong, that need to be changed. And so our presence here in Spokane is to talk to the citizens of Spokane. Thank you.
Thank you. I smiled because this question of how many times a permit can be applied for by how many different groups, I suspect would come up. But the second thing is, you know, all this is on public property.
Yes.
And yes, I foresee we're going to come to some sort of decision point on public property. So there remains private property, and I have not heard that said yet, which is something may want to be considered, because there are several empty private properties in this city. So I think it's certainly fair as a citizen that everybody can address what they can do on public property, but it would seem that if this movement has a broad range of support, that maybe somebody with private property would be willing to provide a place. And we do have a 10-city ordinance already in place if it comes to that. But I mean, it seems to me that you can have confrontation just for the sake of confrontation when there may be alternatives to that. But again, it's, you know, we have a right in this country for First Amendment rights. We have a right to express those. I would still encourage all parties, if it comes to some sort of meeting, that everybody remember that so far this movement has gotten a lot of favorable press by being nonviolent, by being very open to what it's trying to do and cooperate with authorities. Because if it doesn't turn out that way, I think a lot of that favorable sentiment is going to go away, and that's a choice. But again, Martin Luther King, if he's decided to, and he did go to jail, you didn't see him flailing around at people that were opposing him. He said, this is the stand I'm going to take, this is where I'm going to go. So for those in the movement, I think there's a decision to be made down the road. How are you going to resolve this? If you want to take your protests to wherever you think you have to go, are you going to do it violently or nonviolently? That's the choice that you have to make.
And one of the reasons we formed the protest chaplains is to offer a nonviolent presence and to, as much as possible, help make sure there aren't any rogue elements in the movement that precipitate something that we really don't want to see.
Okay, thank you. Stoddard Hodgson, Glenn Anderson, and Linda Seraphin. Good evening.
How are you? Thanks for the time. I just want to speak a little bit about, I work in the real estate industry, and I know you all got jobs, and the biggest jobs in the world are government jobs. You all get benefits, but I, as a realtor, have seen people's lives absolutely devastated. Not only their homes, their jobs, by our own legislation, our own government, shipping jobs off, and they go, too bad, you lost your house, and the bank gets you. They've lost their 401ks. Those are down too. People have really been hurt by all this, and I just hope Spokane reaches out and shows these people, let them work, let them be out there. They're not hurting anybody. I've walked with them. They're chaplains. They're 70-year-old people that fought in World War II. These are good people. They're not making trouble. And I hope Spokane really goes out of their way to make this so they can be visible, it can be good, because there's a point to be made. All of these protests that the press used to slam, from Martin Luther King to women's voting rights to Vietnam, in the end, we were always right. So I hope, we can keep this going and let Spokane be a model city. That we worked with these people and let them have their voice, because it's a valid one. Just look at the real numbers, look at the real fallout. Another friend of mine is a counselor in Hayden Lake. 4 children have committed suicide. Another parent just committed suicide because they're at wit's end. They don't do that because they're feeling good about life. So that's all I got to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Glenn Anderson, Linda Seraphin, and Mr. Champetta.
Well, I think it's a matter of conscience, the whole idea of a movement. People aren't there in the snow for an enjoyment. There are reasons they're there. And I think that I appreciate Congresswoman McLaughlin said that the tent issue, whether tents can be considered a form of free speech or not. But Citizens United created corporations can have money as a form of free speech, and they can have money as a form of free speech so much that normal citizens don't have the same power to create votes. Their votes are becoming unimportant. If you're a corporation, corporations rule. These are some injustices that are huge. And the whole idea of a movement is to, which side are you on? It's a matter of conscience. At some point, you are going to be affected. If I'm a middle-class person, if they do something to Social Security, it will affect me. I'm out there now because some people are being discriminated against, and this is wrong. You have to just decide whether it's wrong, and you have to do the right thing. I believe a tent could be a form of speech as much as money can. Some people who have lost their home, that's not right. I also, the gentleman that was in the audience, Mr. Shogun, you had made a comment about Chicago. I talked to him. He was from Chicago.
Sir, that's fine. Did you hear what he said?
Pardon?
He said a profanity. That's why he was
told to
He
leave.
used a mild epitaph that we use in our culture to disagree with someone. He disagreed with your opinion.
You get elected and run the meeting. If not, continue what you're saying.
I consider that a racial issue.
Well, we'll have a discussion later, but I can't even say the word he said on TV. Are you going to finish what you have to say about Occupy Spokane?
I pretty much finished first what I wanted
good.
to say.
Okay, thank you. Linda Serafin? Hank Chapada?
Thank you for letting me speak again. I feel that if it wasn't for Occupy, I wouldn't have found the voice I had tonight. I've met a bunch of really neat people. I've been homeless. I've lost my house. I still have teenagers. I know what it's like to live in a car and live in a town. I came here 40 years ago to live because it was a neat town. I was originally from LA and Portland, and the streets here you could walk and not get hurt. These people have been wonderful to everyone, and I support them. I'm glad they let me even do what I've done. Tonight, I was up at Franklin Park Mall, which is how I found out about this, and I held a sign up. I driven there in my car. I went to a doctor's appointment today, and people were coming by. Most of them were pretty nice and gave thumbs up and honk, but then you had people come by and flip you off and say derogatory things. And all I could do was smile. I blow them a kiss when they do it. But these people are wonderful, and they should have what they need to speak. I believe in freedom of speech. Thank you.
Thank you. We have Robert Nielsen, Wayne Spitzer, and Phil Smith. Robert Nielsen. Wayne Spitzer.
Hi, Council. Bob. Thanks for the forum. Appreciate it very much. All of these people are here because they've been affected by economic circumstances, the likes of which haven't been seen since the Great Depression. But who isn't here is a silent majority that passes us each day when we're on the street corners or we're on the sidewalks with our signs. I would say 65% of these people give us thumbs up or honk their horns or express their support. Very few give us the finger or throw other derisive comments out their windows at us. Those represent a kind of silent majority right here in Spokane that are also paying attention to all this. And even though they don't join us on the corner, they are paying attention. None of this is happening in a vacuum. We have an entire generation of students that are being released out of college with massive amounts of debt, virtually no jobs out there awaiting them. Certainly we can't take an entire generation of young people and just throw them to the curb. They're not going to go away. This movement's not going to go away. This is a movement of history. It is inevitable. So we have to find creative ways of handling it, whether it's a protest in Little Spokane, Washington, or somewhere else. Nobody, including the greater community, wants to see police going there firing off tear gas or rubber bullets or anything. I don't think they would do that in Spokane. And when they have done that in other cities, it's only galvanized the movement that much more and has turned public perception against those leaders. Bloomberg being the most recent example. So I hope that doesn't happen. If there is violence at the end of all this, it won't be from these people. It'll be from the police coming in and tearing down tents, destroying private property, and using a hammer when no hammer is necessary. So that's really all I have to say, and I'm here just to support these people. I would like to just make an announcement that the GA assembly meetings for Occupy Spokane are held at the Salem Lutheran Church every Wednesday at 6 p.m. at 1428 West Broadway. So come join us, see how the process works, engage in your own democracy. And also we march every Saturday at noon. We meet at the Carousel. And we take a tour of the local banks, and it's a lot of fun. And again, it's a good way to exercise your rights in this fine democracy we have. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Phil Smith, Stephen Siegfried, and then William Cruz.
Yes, my name is Stephen Siegfried. I mainly wanted to speak about why I feel it's important that the Occupy movement is allowed to stay at the park. 6 weeks ago, I didn't know any of these people. And now they're like friends and family to me. To me, a lot of this, what I got into it about to begin with, has changed. Now it's just community. We're building a community on that corner and in that park. And if you allow us to stay there, the community will just get stronger. And I love these people, and I want this movement to continue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. William Cruz.
Council, thank you. I want to thank the City of Spokane and our team as well for fostering cooperation amongst the city and the movement. I think Spokane is a shining example of progressiveness and civility. And I think that along with Lansing, Michigan, and a couple other cities in the nation, we are alone in that respect. And I would like to see that continue. I would also urge you, along with several others, to consider tents a form of free speech and to act on this in a speedy manner for additional reasons as well. In addition to unemployment pressures, we have other major economic pressures facing the country. There's been another major financial firm that has just gone south to the tune of billions of dollars. We've got a major financial crisis brewing in Europe, which we may or may not be able to rescue. Bank of America is considering 10 million additional foreclosures before New Year's Day, actually before Christmas, which is really generous of them. Locally as well, DSHS, whatever.
DSHS.
Thank you, is cut funding for folks. And I'm not sure what the exact number is, but it's in the hundreds of people who are facing losing their place to live, in the thousands. The city of Spokane is about to possibly have thousands more homeless people. What shall we do? If we say they can't have tents, we may possibly be sentencing these people to death. The shelters are full. We can't criminalize these people. The jails are full. Should we end the drug war? We're not allowed to end the drug war by our federal government. We don't have the money to prosecute property crimes. You mentioned that in the new budget, training funds for police are going to be cut. Rural drug interdiction is going to be cut. We lost how much money out of the budget this year for federal funding for shelters? Where the budgets, our economy is under assault from every direction. So I want to urge you to consider how Occupy Spokane can be a positive force. Our tents and our help can help the city transition in this particular arena. And I urge you to consider this matter speedily. Thank you.
Thank you.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Obviously, the matter's before us, and we're listening because we're here. But I repeat again, we are really the bottom of the pipeline on funding. We have a state telling us they're going to cut state funding, and they have basic health, basic food. So, again, contact your state senators and representatives, all of them in this area. Contact Kathy McMorris Rogers, your U.S. representative. Contact the offices of Senators Murray and Cantwell. Because the spigot is above us. It's not below us. I just see where the House decided they were going to cut the formula on heating assistance for the winter. That's not us. That's the U.S. House. So, again, I appreciate the, sir, you already spoke. I'll talk to you after this is over. Please, sir, let me finish the meeting. Thank you. I look forward to a continued dialogue. You're always welcome to call the council office and talk to me, but you need to proceed with the folks that you're already talking to, Mr. Eady and the SPD if you need a meeting. Everybody's talked about restraint, but you're right. As this goes on and it's peaceful, it's going to gain more and more attention from the press and more publicity. As soon as that goes out the window, we'll be just like any other Occupy element in this nation that's turned violent. So that just becomes kind of a blur as to what they stand for.
Joe, I'm not sure that we've gone through everybody.
Oh, well, we have everybody on the list, so now you are?
I would like to speak, if I may. Michael McKay. I'm not on the list.
Well, you were on some list because I saw that name before. Certainly, please come up here, state your name. You have 3 minutes. Take your hat off. Thank you.
Yeah, my name is Michael McKay, President, Council. I was in during the Vietnam War. I saved my money to be able to buy a home when I get out. I wanted to move to Spokane because I was near home. I bought a home in the Gonzaga area. And I'm very proud of the Gonzaga students that I rented to. It's a very large home, 4,000 square feet, 8 bedrooms. I rented to Gonzaga students. I operated my business out of my home. And after 25 years, an elder in my church offered to assist me in refinancing. I hired a real estate agent to keep the transaction ethical, and he was to assist me to make sure we kept our relationship together with this elder in my church who was part of my baptism. Also paid for an attorney to make sure it was ethical and legal. The elder in my church ended up with my home of 25 years, and then he sold it to the real estate agent at a very handsome profit, and I was left homeless. The Occupy movement is about corruption in America. It's not only in America, but it's in Spokane. And I've gone to over 200 people in my church asking for help. And they quote the Bible and say that I just need to turn it over to the Lord. And I'm homeless. I have hope with these people in Occupy Spokane. And I would ask that you please allow them to have the tents in the park. I have more hope with them than anybody else that I've asked help for. And I'm asking for your help. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Sir?
Yes.
No, Steve.
All right.
You are?
My name is Stephen Osweiler, and I don't like to speak in front of people, but I kind of felt compelled. So I've been on the safety, I was on the safety committee at the Triangle. Safety committee being an individual that meets and greets people that come up and basically tries to maintain order and control and things like that. And I eventually got frustrated enough that I had to finally step down. I've also been on the General Assembly Committee where we try to decide how to run all the other committees and all the other meetings. And our movement right now is a microcosm of the macrocosm that I'm sure that you all go through. You know, you have a unified front when you're sitting in front of the public, but behind the scenes it's contentious and there are disagreements and there's political maneuvering and so on and so forth. I am not present at the Franklin Park occupation. That's not my particular gig, but I am here to stand in support for the individuals that I've met, and I think you've heard the passion that people have expressed. This is about a community reconnecting with one another. I know people from all walks of life from this movement, veterans, homeless people, kids that are out on the streets, nurses, teachers, students, and we're all starting to come back together again and learn each other's names. We recognize that it doesn't matter how we're dressed. It doesn't matter whether or not we're employed or unemployed, abled or disabled. We're coming together to try and solve very complex problems that are going to impact everyone. There is a reason why they call this the 99% movement, because the vast majority of the people in the United States, in the world, are of the 99%. And even the 1%ers out there are coming forward and they're saying, yes, there is something profoundly wrong with the system that we're trying to work within. They're asking for permission to peaceably occupy a public park for the expression of their constitutional rights. And I believe morally that trumps any law or ordinance or anything else that's on the books. If they break the rules, you have the right to enforce the laws. But I will tell you this, for as long as I have been involved in this movement, we have done everything in our power to comply to the letter of the law, even when the spirit of the law is against the community and the people themselves. So, thank you.
Anyone else? That's all the business that's come before us this evening. We are adjourned.